Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris, and today I'm joined by Ken Corish to talk everything to do with online safety. As Ken and I talk about, this resonates with me because in my family I've got the age ranges of young children and older people who have varying degrees of technological skill, should we say, or experience. And I'm sure if you're tuning into this, then you'll be in a similar situation. And I think it's fair to say that we all recognize the effect, the profound effect that technology has on all of our lives. And both, as we talk about, Ken and I, empowering us, but also preventing us from doing things or presenting some risks from a sort of negative perspective as well. So we talk about that. It's a bit shorter than I would have liked. I'd have loved to deep dive into this further, but Ken had a bit of time commitments, but we get pack a lot in to the sort of 25 minutes or so that we speak. So I'm sure you'll enjoy it and get a lot from it. There's a few resources at the end that Ken provides as well, particularly if you've got kids in school. He runs some programs to help schools to educate their kids better about online safety and keep people safe. So I'm sure that will be helpful if that relates to you as well. Let's get into it then and join my conversation with Ken Corish. Cheers. Welcome to the podcast, Ken. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks very much, Christian. It's good to have the opportunity to come along and speak with you today.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining me. And I've got a particular sort of personal interest in this topic because I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and the 7-year-old is just starting his kind of online journey.
So, you know, every group of professionals we speak to, particularly those who have a role in terms of safeguarding and safety, whenever we talk about this, they always put it into their own context of their own family. So we can talk to safeguarding professionals who work with hundreds of children across the course of their role, you know, and yet the questions they ask are always about, do you know what, my kids do this and I've watched my kids do that. And the one big advantage we used to say, you know, in the work that we do, if anybody's talking about this from a sort of quote, air quote, expert point of view, and they talk about their own children, they're not meeting enough real world other people's children out there as part of their role. So it's really interesting how we always hone it back to our own experience, because this thing that we're going to talk about is not just about teens and phones anymore. It's societal. It's about you. It's about me. It's about our grandparents, our parents, youth, very young children. So yeah, it really resonates with people, this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. So in my family, we've got the kids just starting on their journey. I've got a niece who's a little bit older, a couple of years older, so she's kind of, you know, and then at the other end of the scale, you know, we've got sort of grandparents, should we say, who are less adept at technology, and kind of, I feel as if, you know, you hear these stories about people getting entrapped and all sorts of things, don't you, on Radio 4 and
the risk vector changes all the way through, and that's why I think to a certain point that if we were talking about this subject, I don't know, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, we'd be talking about these old messages about stop, block, report, go and look at your privacy settings, don't share private information. That whole landscape's been blown out of the water because those little bite-sized messages that we say are actually irrelevant. They don't even resonate with us, let alone children and young people anymore. So it's about adding sophistication to the way we deal with this, because this is no longer just a sort of a small aspect of society. It runs through the whole lot. For example, you know, from the recent research from Ofcom and the Media Use and Attitudes Report, which is an annual report they release about how the UK children and families and society is using technology. The biggest adopters of technology for the last 2 years have been 3- and 4-year-olds, which is astounding. 1 in 5 under 4s in the UK at the moment own, not just use or have access to, own their own mobile connected device.
Wow.
Which is astounding
Mm.
But not surprising, because that's the environment we've modeled around them. That's what they're used to. So, when you're talking about that end of the scale, and then you're talking about emerging teens, and then you're talking about teens and younger adults, and then us, ourselves, and how we use technology and model, the whole thing's complex and interrelated, which is why there's no real simple solution to this anymore. And I come back to this point, it always comes down to how we educate, how we interact with our children, how we intervene when things go wrong, and to do it in the right sort of way.
So how are sort of online risks classified overall, and then kind of which have the biggest potential for causing harm?
Online risks are way back in 2008, when Tanya Byron produced a review for the government. Professor Tanya Byron produced a review for the government. She classified risks into what then were called the 3 C's. Okay. So the first set of risks about our content, what children see, or what we all see online. So the sort of content we engage with. So that could be sexual content, violent content, inappropriate content, content that's not true, that's misinformation or disinformation, and then the second C is about who we're talking to, contact. Yep. So it's not just what we're seeing, but who we're engaging with online. And that brings in all of the negative stuff as well, around grooming, around bullying. You need to be contactable to be bullied. And then the final C is conduct, how we behave, not just children themselves, but ourselves, and the sort of behaviors we see emerge from engagement with these sort of technologies. But recently, we've added a final C, which is contract. So there are now 4 C's, and that's the services with which we engage. And without knowing it, many of us think all this stuff is free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. All of this business model around the services with which we engage influence and affect and infiltrate our lives to such an extent that we've seen some significant changes at government level to try and regulate that actual part of the services that we use. So, yeah, so that's how we classify risk. They're sort of further subdivided down into different categories. But then also too, there are some cross-cutting things that run all the way through. So our ability to be able to differentiate, to critically analyze, to be able to make sense of and find the truth in what we see. It's never been more difficult than it is now to find the truth in what we see. And we talk to, lots of people about media literacy, digital literacy, critical thinking, digital citizenship. And yeah, it's a whole set of skills that we're still not very, very good at teaching. So which ones have the biggest risks? Well, it's obvious the ones that we've concentrated on the most are these ones like grooming, online child sexual exploitation, self-generated sexual images, images of child sexual abuse, virtual self-harm, bullying. All of these ones we know, they're high impact risks, and the outcomes for those could be serious. But Christian, they are not the most frequent ones. In fact, they're relatively infrequent. And so whilst we, in safeguarding terms, we should be looking at those things with children, because the outcomes can be really serious harm or worse. But actually what we're beginning to understand is what the majority of us face are these things that aren't quite low-level risks, but they're cumulative. And so they impact a lot more on our mental health, our physical health, our well-being, our self-image, our identity, all of those things that we've seen over the pandemic increase. We've seen a 10% reduction in young people's positive well-being over the last 5 years, and most of that's been accelerated through the pandemic. So, socializing purely through these sort of media, there's something been missing, and they're cumulative, and they're equally as damaging to a young person's development and their confidence and their sociality, as are the things that we're concentrating at the high end, the high end risks that don't happen to most people. And so this is why we've seen a shift in the landscape and a shift in the balance about what we focus on. There is room to focus on both. So protecting children, protecting all of us is really important, but actually how we use technology and the impact it has on our lives, our own development, how we live our lives is equally as important. So that's why we've seen the breadth of what we do increase significantly.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm surprised that there isn't a fifth C for Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, oh, they're in contract somewhere.
Yeah,
they're tucked away in the contracts they've made with third parties and for the online service providers. Definitely.
Yeah. So how bringing up Cambridge Analytica, obviously that takes us on to the US election and politics, and so I mean how has the political landscape on this issue been changing over the recent years, and are we moving as you say we should to focusing on more of these kind of higher frequency things that are cumulatively affecting us, or are we still kind of focusing on the high impact but low frequency side of things?
So the high impact stuff still needs to be addressed, because you don't want to be caught short by something happen because you've taken an eye off the ball. Any child that goes through serious harm is a failure on behalf of the system.
Yeah.
But the question you ask about that broader cultural changes is interesting, because we are to a certain extent victim of the ecosystem in which we've inserted ourselves. We have to think to ourselves that actually currently most of us get our news online. Mm-hmm. Certainly more than traditional broadcast media, certainly more than traditional print media. And it's no accident that those traditional print media, most notably Guardian and Mail, have moved themselves into a very strong online position in terms of passing across. The problem with online, and particularly if most of our news comes from social media, is that social media is designed from a commercial model. It tends to push towards us things that we like and things that we agree with. Now, while that might be okay if you're out there looking for a new pair of shoes or clothes or a new part for your computer, it will push things that are going to help you find what you're looking for. When it comes to political opinion or wider debate, if it's doing that using those same commercial algorithms to push views that only you agree with, we end up with a very polarized view of what's going on there in society, and that further entrenches itself, I think, into the groups of people we find ourselves associating with. So it's no accident that during Brexit or even during the presidential election, nobody thought Trump would win. Nobody thought we would leave the European Union, because we were all inside, what they term these filter bubbles or echo chambers that have been created around social media. And then you'll see people talk, I spoke to no one who was going to vote for Brexit. Well, of course you didn't, because you were wrapped in that particular bubble of agreement. And so, the people who want to affect regime change, and remember, regime change literally only needs to swing a vote a certain way, are very effectively using this data to be able to do exactly that. So in the Cambridge Analytica, we saw that began as an open, sort of friendly looking quiz on Facebook that a lot of people died in. They contributed the data. Cambridge Analytica then used that data from Facebook to be able to identify those particular social profiles that were most likely to change their mind, targeted them specifically. And it comes from software that's used by the National Security Agency in America to affect regime change in foreign countries. So it's got to be well-founded technology. And so whilst that stuff will continue to go on, then there's a role for people like myself who work in this area to be able to not only raise awareness, but also to build the next generation of users, which are children and young people, to build that next generation of users that are going to be much more resilient, much more critical, much more well prepared to be able to begin to divest the truth and veracity around what they're being told, and also to not be afraid to stick their head above the parapet and see what the bigger picture is. That's what digital citizenship is. It's amplifying the voice of individuals for them to function as an effective and a visible member of society. So, these are great big overarching things we're talking about. And when it comes down to it, nobody's got the right solution, but we're working really hard to focus on the educative changes. And we think that education does need to significantly change. It needs to be a lot more clearer, a lot more effective, a lot more regular. It's an important component of our lives now. It's equally as important as literacy and numeracy. These sort of things can affect your life chances and how you live your life too.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that I always think that the school system is, speaking as like an entrepreneur who's had to take risks and and do things in a slightly different way than somebody going through a traditional career path, shall we say. I kind of feel like the education system is kind of not encouraging that critical thinking and not encouraging that questioning. It's kind of saying, right, here's an authority figure. You want to appease that authority figure, whether that's a teacher or whether that could be something online. So I wonder if there's a bit of a dichotomy there that we need to kind of overcome a little bit as well, to try and encourage that critical thinking and that questioning. So people are not, particularly kids, are not just going along with the flow and falling into these traps.
That's really so. Number one, I really feel sorry for schools. And have done for a long time. My own background is in education as a teacher and a local authority advisor and school improvement advisor, and I feel sorry for schools because they've been hit with so many big sticks about, not just during the pandemic, but even before, in terms of young people's achievement and driving them towards gaining the qualifications that they have. So where they prioritize stuff is going to be in the traditional routes around literacy, numeracy, languages, STEM subjects, science, computing, all of those different things that they need to focus on. But actually, the big wake-up call is that in all of those different subjects, if you empower young people to use technology to empower themselves, you're going to get better achievement. You're going to get better results. You're going to get much more innovative, creative, out-of-the-box thinkers if they're using and adapting technology to move themselves into positions where they're going to succeed. And so that, for me, the big danger is if schools pick this up and said, right, it's Tuesday afternoon, it's 2:00, we're going to do critical thinking. You missed the point. Yeah. You've got to weave this through the other stuff that you do, because it not only does it affect the other stuff that you do, but it also supports it as well. So you're quite right. But it's a hard gig for schools, particularly at the moment. So we're not pushing that. What we're trying to do is to provide for ourselves at the moment through a particular project we're working on called Project Evolve, which has been phenomenally successful for us. We partner with Nominet, who are the UK domain name regulator. Yeah. We've produced not only resources, but ways in which teachers can navigate those resources by meeting the needs of those children in front of them. By children, I mean anyone from age 4 right the way through to 18. Yeah. We've provided a huge set of resources that they choose, but we've also created a mechanism that allows them to cast a net over the people sat in front of them, identify what their needs are in terms of online learning, and then that data feeds back into the tool and says, you need to look at this, you need to look at this. For that group, never mind, here's a big list of stuff I've got to teach, and I'm going to teach it to you anyway, whether you know it or not. This is about what do they need, and that we see that as the sort of drip feed way forward. It's really resonated with a lot of schools, to be honest, Christian, because since its inception about a year ago, we now have nearly 25,000 teachers using it, and 6,500 schools. It's just coming to 7,000 schools, and it's completely free to use. We've developed it just to be accessible. So that way of thinking in a much more sophisticated way, rather than you having your online safety lesson now, or I'm doing something for Safer Internet Day one day of the year, and now we'll move on. Yeah. Or we've had a shouty man. We've had a shouty man turn up who's just shouted at everyone for 40 minutes in assembly, frightened the life out of the kids and left, Yeah,
that harkens back to my school days, I think. But perhaps not about online security, but other things. Yeah, but you're quite right to pull up the fact that, and this is one of the topics I love to discuss on the podcast, is about that there's two sides of the coin, isn't there? In terms of risk, risk isn't just about the negatives. It's actually about empowering people to take positive steps, which it sounds like this program you're working on is doing. I I mean, overall, and I'm conscious of time because I know you've got something else to move on to. Where do you see, which approaches and strategies are kind of making the biggest difference? Both, looking at both sides of that coin, so empowering people and protecting people online.
So there's been a lot of change across the whole landscape recently, particularly UK change, in terms of the online harms bill, which we've seen. I think it's still on its journey through Parliament, but it is going to emerge. And the online harms bill is the first, I think, bill in the world, probably save some of the work done in Australia and some in Germany, that's beginning to attempt to regulate the online services that people offer. And by people, industry, I mean Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Roblox, Minecraft, all of PlayStation, all of these different environments in which not just what children find themselves in, but also where adults are. And to be able to establish this really important thing that we've been very used to in education in terms of duty of care, in terms of the spaces that they provide, the business models that they use, the way they extract data, the way they respond to issues that people have on the platforms. And it's quite, the rest of the world is watching, it's quite a seminal step forward because Ofcom have been identified as the regulator. They've got quite sweeping powers, up to 10% of the company's profits in terms of fines if they've broken the legislation outlined in the online harms bill. We've seen the introduction from the Information Commissioner's Office of something called the Age Appropriate Design Code, which for any new services that will appear after the online harms bill, they will need to build the mechanisms and the environments in line with this age appropriate design code. Otherwise, they'll not be allowed to operate within the UK. We've seen a big push by the government too in expanding and pushing media literacy, not only for children and young people, but for the whole of the population. So there is a will there at the moment, rudderless and guideless as the government currently seems to be. There's a lot of good work going on over the surface. Now, whether you think it's good work or not, I think we're all waiting to see not only how industry responds to it, but also how effective that legislation will be and how effective Ofcom will be as a regulator, because nobody else has done this before. And it could be doomed to fail. Some of the other things we've seen that have sort of been taken off the radar was a bill that was coming through and then shelved called the Digital Economies Act, which attempted to legislate age verification mechanisms. So particularly for things like gambling, alcohol sales, but more importantly, those providers of adult content. So this is not illegal adult content. These are adult content providers like MindGeek, who run Pornhub and stuff like that. But that was taken off because age verification was, I think, incorporated into the online harms bill. Still very, very difficult to achieve. It's really easy to bypass any age verification mechanisms. A teen who wants to look at porn will probably find their way to it one way or another. And so providing age verification mechanisms protects the industry rather than children. So it's always putting up fences, barriers, and legislation is only part of the story. The rest of it comes through how well we engage children and young people and prepare them for what is, the world that you operate in, that relies on technology for so many of its functions, not just for communication, for its whole infrastructure and operations. So so there is a lot of movement that's happening at the moment and stuff.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much for your time, Ken. Just before we wrap up, is there any links you could share or resources that you recommend? How could people get in touch with you if they wanted to, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can get in touch with us. So my organisation is called Southwest Grid for Learning. So you can find their website at swgfl.org.uk. If you are working, if you're a parent and you want more information around this, or a teacher or an educator or someone who's worried about what your children are doing online, the UK Safer Internet Centre is, you can find that with a Google online. You'll find her at saferinternet.org.uk. And if you're a business wanting to address some of these issues for your workforce, we also have a commercial arm of our organisation called EdTESA, that's EDTESA at edtesa.com. You'll find that online, where we produce similar sorts of safeguarding and wellbeing tools for SMEs and SMBs who are looking for to the well-being of their own staff too as well. So yeah, there's just a few of them. And if you are interested in educating your child or pushing your school to educate your child around this, then get them interested in Project Evolve. Project Evolve, all one string, projectevolve.co.uk, and it's free to use. Push your school towards that to make sure that they're doing their most effective work around educating your child around that.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, Ken. Really enjoyed it. And thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, Christian. Bye-bye.